Right now, your heart is beating. You are not thinking about it. You never asked it to start. And one day, without your permission, it will stop. That moment, the moment your heart stops beating for the final time, is the most universal thing every single human who has ever lived has in common. Kings, peasants, philosophers, warriors, every one of them arrived at the same door. And yet, almost no one knows what actually happens when you walk through it. Not the spiritual version, not the religious version, the real version, the biological second by second version of what your body, your brain, and your consciousness actually experience in the moments, hours, and days after you die. It is stranger than you have been told. And it starts before you even think it does. Before the moment of death, something happens that scientists are only beginning to understand. Your brain, sensing that the end is near, does not shut down quietly. It surges. Researchers at the University of Michigan, led by Dr. Jimo Borjigin, published a landmark study in 2013 demonstrating that in the final moments before cardiac death, the brains of rats produced a wave of gamma waves, the same high-frequency signals associated with vivid dreaming, intense memory recall, and heightened consciousness, more powerful than anything recorded during normal waking life. Your brain, in its final seconds, is more awake than it has ever been. Think about that. The one moment scientists assumed your mind would go dark is the one moment it blazes brightest. Some researchers believe this is the biological origin of near-death experiences. The tunnel of light, the sense of peace, the life flashing before your eyes. These are not hallucinations. They may be your brain performing its most extraordinary act, a final, overwhelming burst of perception before the power goes out permanently. And then it does. Clinically, death begins when your heart stops beating. That is called cardiac arrest. But here is what most people do not know. Dying and dead are not the same thing. Not immediately. Dr. Sam Parnia, Director of Critical Care and Resuscitation Research at NYU Langone Health, has spent decades studying what he calls the dying process. And his conclusion is striking. In the minutes immediately following cardiac arrest, you are in a state called clinical death, but your cells are still alive. Your brain cells without oxygen begin to suffer, but they do not die immediately. They begin to deteriorate. This is the window, the 4 to 6 minute window that emergency responders race against. Inside that window, if circulation is restored, your experience of death can be reversed. Thousands of people have come back from inside that window and reported what they felt. The scientific study of these accounts, called perimortem consciousness research, has produced some of the most extraordinary data in modern medicine. In a 2014 study published in the journal Resuscitation, Dr. Parnia's team documented that 40% of cardiac arrest survivors reported some form of awareness during the period when they were clinically dead. Not vague feelings, specific, verifiable memories of what happened in the room around them. But beyond the window, the process becomes irreversible, and what follows is one of the most precisely choreographed sequences in all of biology. At the moment of death, your cells lose access to oxygen. Without oxygen, they can no longer produce ATP, the molecule your body uses as fuel for every single function. In the first few minutes, your brain cells begin to break down. Neurotransmitters flood the synapses uncontrolled. The electrical signals that made you think, feel, remember, and dream collapse into noise. Within 4 to 6 minutes of no oxygen, the neurons in your cerebral cortex, the part of your brain that holds your language, your memories, your personality, your sense of self, begin to die in large numbers. This is the point at which doctors consider the brain death window to begin. But your body is not finished. Your skin is still alive. Your hair follicles are still alive. For hours after the heart stops, individual cells scattered throughout your body are still metabolizing, still consuming whatever oxygen remains locked in local tissue. It is not a single death. It is millions of tiny deaths happening in slow sequence. Within 15 to 30 minutes, your skin begins to pale as blood drains toward gravity. This is called livor mortis, the pooling of blood toward whatever surface the body is resting on. Within 3 to 4 hours, the first visible sign that most people associate with death begins: rigor mortis. The muscles, starved of ATP, can no longer release their contraction. They lock. The face sets, the hands curl. The body becomes rigid. This was the process that ancient peoples watched with terror and reverence. It was evidence of something profound and irreversible happening to someone they knew, and it drove them to build every funeral rite, every burial ritual, every religion that ever tried to explain what happens next. But here is something those ancient peoples could not have known. Decomposition is not destruction, it is transformation. Within 4 to 5 days, the bacteria that have lived inside your gut, the same bacteria that helped you digest your food, that influenced your mood, that Dr. Rob Knight at UC San Diego has shown contains more genetic information than your own human DNA, those bacteria do not die with you. They survive. And when the immune system that kept them contained finally fails, they begin to consume you from the inside. This process, called putrefaction, is what drives the visible changes of decomposition, and what it produces over weeks, months, and years is not waste. It is fuel. Your body becomes the richest possible nutrient source for the soil around it. Carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, the elements your body spent a lifetime accumulating, are returned, one molecule at a time, to the ecosystem. You do not disappear. You redistribute. Dr. Jessica Metcalf at Colorado State University has studied what she calls the Thanatah microbiome, the community of microorganisms that colonizes a body after death. And her research shows something remarkable. The decomposition process is extraordinarily ordered, predictable. A succession of microbial communities moves through the body in a specific sequence, each one creating the conditions for the next. Death, it turns out, follows rules. But what about the part of you that makes you you? Your consciousness, your memories, your sense of being a specific person who wakes up every morning inside a specific body. What happens to that? This is the question that has driven every religion, every philosophy, and every late-night conversation humans have ever had. And it is the question science is most reluctant to answer definitively. What we know is this: consciousness, as far as neuroscience can measure it, arises from activity in the brain. Dr. Christoph Koch, chief scientist at the Allen Institute for Brain Science, has spent his career mapping the neural correlates of consciousness, trying to find where in the brain experience actually lives. His conclusion, and the conclusion of most mainstream neuroscience, is that consciousness is a product of physical brain processes. When those processes stop permanently, the experience stops. But Koch himself admits this is deeply unsatisfying, because it does not explain the hard problem, the question of why there is something it feels like to be you, and not simply nothing. There are physicists and philosophers, among them the late Nobel laureate Roger Penrose, who have proposed that consciousness may have properties that transcend the physical neurons, that it may interact with quantum-level processes in ways that current neuroscience cannot capture. This is not mysticism. This is a legitimate, unresolved question at the frontier of science. The honest answer is, no one knows what happens to consciousness when the body dies. Not with certainty, not yet. But here is what we do know. The atoms in your body are, on average, 13.5 billion years old. Every atom of carbon in your bones was forged inside a star that exploded before our solar system existed. Every atom of oxygen in the air your lungs are pulling in right now was released by organisms that lived and died hundreds of millions of years before the first dinosaur walked the earth. You are not a permanent thing. You are a temporary arrangement of ancient materials. And when the arrangement ends, the materials do not end with it. In that sense, you have already been part of countless other living things. And after you die, you will be part of countless more. There is something in that idea that your ancestors felt, without the science to explain it. Every culture that has ever existed developed a belief that death is not an ending but a transition. They disagreed on the destination, but they agreed on the direction. Forward. And maybe that is not just wishful thinking. Maybe it is the oldest scientific intuition in human history, a pattern recognized before the tools existed to measure it. Right now, your heart is still beating, and now you know exactly what that means because you know precisely what happens the moment it stops.